The Black Radical Tradition. Cedric takes Marx and Engels to task for underestimating the material force of racial ideology on proletarian consciousness and for conflating the English working class with the workers of the world. In his preface to the 2000 edition of Black Marxism, Cedric writes, Marxism's internationalism was not global. Its materialism was exposed as an insufficient explanator of cultural and social forces, and its economic determinism too often politically compromised freedom struggles beyond or outside the metropole. It is a damning observation. Many would counter by pointing to Marx's writings on India, the United States, Russia, slavery, colonialism, imperialism, and peasants. Others argue that Marx himself never claimed to be doing anything beyond understanding capitalist development in Western Europe. But because neither Marx nor Engels considered the colonies and their plantations, gotta make a little note, central to modern capitalist processes, class struggles within the slave regime or peasant rebellions within the colonial order were ignored or dismissed as underdeveloped or peripheral, especially since they looked nothing like the secular radical humanism of 1848 or 1789. Cedric's point is that Marx and Engels missed the significance of revolt in the rest of the world, specifically by non-Western people who made up the vast majority of the world's unfree non-industrial labor force. Unfree labor in Africa, the Americas, Asia, and the islands of the sea were producing the lion's share of surplus value for the world system of racial capitalism, but the ideological source of the revolts was not the mode of production. Hold up, give me 3 seconds, gotta make another note, you know what's up. This is a book you're supposed to read and reread, because you're gonna, dude, when I was reading this, rereading this just to write my notes and stuff, I'm like, dang, I missed some stuff. And that's okay. But the ideological source of the revolts was not the mode of production. Africans kidnapped and drawn into this system were ripped from superstructures with radically different beliefs, morality, cosmology, metaphysics, and intellectual traditions. Robinson observes, and then I also use these for notes, they help. Observes, Marx had not realized fully the cargoes of labor also contained African cultures, critical mixes and admixtures of language and thought, of cosmology and metaphysics, of habits, beliefs, and morality. These were the actual terms of their humanity. These cargoes, then, did not consist of intellectual isolates or decultured blanks, men, women, and children separated from their previous universe. African labor brought the past with it, a past that had produced it and settled on it the first elements of consciousness and comprehension. From this observation, Robinson unveils the secret history of the Black radical tradition, which he describes as a revolutionary consciousness that proceeded from the whole historical experience of Black people. The Black radical tradition defies racial capitalism's efforts to remake African social life and generate new categories of human experiences stripped bare of the historical consciousness embedded in the culture. Tracing the roots of Black radical thought to a shared epistemology among diverse African people, he argues that the first wave of African New World revolts were governed not by a critiqued structure by Western conceptions of freedom, but by a total rejection of enslavement and racism as it was experienced. Behind the revolts were not charismatic men, more often than that, women. I just made a connection in my brain. Dang, I was wrong but right at the same time because I didn't fully explain that thought earlier. But that's okay. In fact, the female-led horizontal formations that were currently at the forefront of resisting state violence and racial capitalism are more in line with the Black radical tradition than traditional civil rights organizations. H.T.L. Kwan reminds us of the centrality of women in Robinson's historical archaeology of Black revolt. Indeed, Kwan writes, the women who people Robinson's imagination are not the anorexic, two-dimensional, mainstream feminist heroines whom we often encounter in gender-related texts, but the plotters of history. They are the women of substance, of imagination, of formative social force, women who would kill and wage revolutions against the state and the world economy. Africans chose flight and maroonage because they were less interested in transforming Western society than finding a way home, even if that meant death. However, with the advent of formal colonialism and the incorporation of black labor into a more fully governed social structure, emerges the native bourgeoisie, the black intellectuals whose position within the political, educational, and bureaucratic structures of the dominant racial and colonial order gave them greater access to European life and thought. They're like within the shit, right? Their contradictory role as descendants of enslaved, victims of racial domination, and tools of empire compelled some of these men and women to rebel, thus producing the black radical intelligentsia. And it is this intelligentsia that occupies the last section of the book. Robinson reveals how W.E.B. Du Bois, C.L.R. James, and Richard Wright, by confronting black mass movements, revised Western Marxism or broke from it altogether. The way they came to the black radical tradition was more of an act of recognition than invention. They divined a theory of black radicalism through what they have found in the movements of black masses. The final section of this book has also been a source of confusion and misapprehension. Black Marxism is not a book about black Marxists or about the ways in which black intellectuals improved Marxism by attending to race. This fundamental misunderstanding has led even the most sympathetic readers to treat the black radical tradition as a checklist of our favorite black radical intellectuals. Isn't Frantz Fanon part of the black radical tradition? What about Claudia Jones? Why not Walter Rodney? Where are the African Marxists? Of course, Cedric would agree that these and other figures were both products of and contributors to the black radical tradition. As he humbly closes his preface from the 2000 edition, it was never my purpose to exhaust the subject, only to suggest that it was there. But the black radical tradition is not a greatest hit list. Cedric was clear. The black intellectuals at the center of this work were not the black radical tradition, nor did they stand outside of it. Through praxis, they discovered it, or better yet, were overtaken by it. Marxism was their path towards discovery, but apprehending the black radical tradition required a break with Marx and Engels' historical materialism. And as far as Cedric was concerned, sometimes the black intellectuals about whom he writes fell short. Black Marxism is neither Marxist nor anti-Marxist. It is a dialectical critique of Marxism that turned to the long history of black revolt and the black radical intellectuals who, in confronting fascism, colonialism, and the prospect of socialism, also turned to the history of black revolt to construct a wholly original theory of revolution and interpretation of the history of the modern world. Eat it up, eat it up, eat it up. Cedric's inveterate, Inveterate, I don't think I said that word correctly, modesty notwithstanding, black Marxism is a monumental achievement. It is one of the most path-breaking works of political theory to appear in the 20th century, and it stands alongside Du Bois's Black Reconstruction in America, C.L.R. James's The Black Jacobsons, as one of the key texts to discern and extend the very theory of black radicalism that is the subject of this book. In other words, black Marxism is itself a product of the black radical tradition, and so is its author. If the black radical tradition is indeed a creation, ACCRETION. Damn, I really do need a dictionary. Over generations of collective intelligence gathered from struggle, then black Marxism's long history begins in post-Reconstruction Alabama. And even that's not the whole truth. Next, Cedric Robinson and the Making of Black Marxism. Cedric dedicated his first book, The Terms of Order, Political Science, and the Myth of Leadership, to Winston Cap Whiteside, grandson of slaves, a man of extraordinary courage and profound understanding. My grandfather and my first teacher, within quotations. He consistently cited his maternal grandfather's influence on his intellectual and political development. Cedric was born November 5th, 1940, to a single mother, Clara Whiteside, but raised largely by his extended family in West Oakland, California. His grandparents' house at 3020 Adeline Street became his second home, and sometimes his first, where Celine, Mamadou, and Cap doted on their grandson and filled his eager mind with invaluable stories and lessons. Although he had little formal education and worked principally as a porter or janitor, Cap owned his Adeline Street home and was respected in his community. He was the first person Cedric encountered who embodied the personal dignity, discipline, quiet intelligence, spiritual and ethical grounding, courage and commitment to family and community that characterized the Black radical tradition. Born in Mobile, Alabama, on June 7th, 1893, Winston Wilmer Whiteside was the youngest of 7 children belonging to Clara and Benjamin Whiteside, both of whom have been enslaved. Benjamin was born on a plantation in western North Carolina. He was 18 when the Civil War ended. Sorry, that just put more time into perspective. Because my grandfather was born in 1934. And Sorry. Nothing. Ended and saw no future in a mostly white county on the edge of Appalachia. So he traveled south until he hit the water's edge, the port city of Mobile, Alabama, where he met Clara Mercer, who also left her place of bondage, Virginia, for the promise of a new life in the city. The couple married on May 16, 1870, as the war over the future of American democracy was being waged in the South. They lived through the Reconstruction Amendments, the democratization of states' constitutions in 1868, promoted in a large part by Black political leadership, and the rise of organized racial terror. They found each other in a whirlwind of movement, when families broken up under bondage sought to reunite, when marriage and family and community building were the priorities of free people. By the time Winston was born, the South had moved, in Du Bois's apt words, back towards slavery. In Alabama, in 1893 alone, at least 20 Black men and 1 Black woman had been lynched. 8 years later, the planter class consolidated its power, rewriting the state constitution to strip Black people of the franchise. Benjamin and Clara managed to purchase a house and raise 7 children on the meager earnings from domestic work, day labor, selling wood, and catering on the side. They didn't make much, but it was enough to send their youngest Winston to school for a bit. He cared for his aging parents, married a neighborhood girl named Corinne, who gave birth to their 3 daughters, the eldest being Cedric's mother, and then divorced. Cap married Cecilia a few years later. She would be the reason the family ended up in Oakland. According to Cedric, his grandfather fled Mobile after beating up a white hotel manager for trying to sexually assault Celia, who worked there as a housekeeper. Cap knocked the man unconscious and left him hanging on a hook on the hotel's cold storage room. A few days later, he headed west, first to Chicago, then to Oakland, following by Cecilia and 3 daughters, Clara, Leanne, and Wilma. In his book, The Black Movement in America, Cedric Riley delivers, and the denouncement. Chastened, the manager gained a reputation as one of the best friends of the Negro in Mobile. Cap's influence on Cedric was profound. Cedric later credited his grandfather, a Seventh-day Adventist, it's okay, with instilling him a notion of faith. For Cedric, this was less about the existence of God than the recognition of what he later described in Black Marxism a metaphysical system that never allowed for property in either the physical, philosophical, temporal, legal, social, or psychic senses. In other words, slavery and racial capitalism were incapable of what Aimé Césaire, I think I said his name wrong, S-E with a accent, called thinkification, so long as Black people can preserve this ontological totality. Cedric attended public school where he learned from Black women and men who held advanced degrees but could not break the professional color bar. He took great pride in his teachers and the challenging intellectual environment they created. But he also listened to elders and ancestors, heeded memories, spirits, and ghostly matters, learned from the extraordinary folks professional historians mistook for ordinary, and discovered in the Black radical tradition whole communities in motion, full of imperfections and contradictions, but holding on to each other because they had to and because their culture demanded it. He attended Berkeley High, a school with a reputation for academic excellence, political radicalism, and racism. In the 1950s, Black students at Berkeley were often steered away from college prep courses towards metal shops and an unspoken color bar separated student activities. But Cedric ignored the counselors, excelled academically, and joined the language club, the history club, the math club, Club Espanol, and served as the first vice president of the newly formed Modern Jazz Club. Consequently, the counselors ignored Cedric. He received no assistance or direction with the college admissions process. Cedric simply showed up at UC Berkeley's campus in the fall of 1958 and stood in the registration line, falling behind Shamala Gopalan, an incoming doctoral student from India studying endocrinology, the future mother of Vice President candidate Kamala Harris. They would eventually end up in the same political circles, perhaps because he followed an international student, was dark-skinned, and projected a sense of entitlement at a university with so few Black students. The registrar assumed that he was an African national and asked if his government planned to pay his fees. Cedric paid his own fees, which in those days amounted to about $60. Girl. Okay, pause real quick. But to make ends meet, he worked at the campus coffee house, cleaning hotel rooms, and spending his summers working at a cannery. He majored in social anthropology and soon gained a reputation as an activist. He and J. Herman Blake, a sociology doctoral student and future university administrator who would ghostwrite Huey P. Newton's memoir, Revolutionary Suicide, were principal leaders of the NAACP's campus chapter. In March of 1961, they worked with the Fair Play for Cuba Committee to bring Robert F. Williams to speak at Berkeley High's Little Theater. Former president of the Monroe, North Carolina chapter of the NAACP, William came to prominence after the national leadership suspended him for advocating armed self-defense. In 1960, he traveled to Cuba with a delegation of Black artists and intellectuals. Returning home, hoisted a Cuban flag in his backyard and pledged his support for Fidel Castro. Just months after his Berkeley visit, Williams and his family took refuge in Cuba to escape trumped-up kidnapping charges. Blake and Robinson had invited Williams in defiance of national leadership. As Cedric explained to historian Donna Murch, they decided to break with Roy Wilkins and the Old Guard. We wanted a different kind of analysis, a politics that emerged from an analysis of race in America and race in the globe. These were the global as well as the international dynamics at the time. A month later, the Kennedy administration launched the failed Bay of Pigs invasion of Cuba. Cedric helped organize demonstrations on campus against the invasion and U.S. policy towards Cuba, for which he received a one-semester suspension. The University of California prohibited protests on campus without official approval and 48 hours notice. In his defense, Cedric countered that the U.S. government did not give them 48 hours warning before launching the invasion. Since he had to finish out the spring term, he continued to agitate. He and Blake had invited Malcolm X to speak on campus in May, only to be rebuffed by the administration. They eventually moved the event off campus. Cedric and Blake joined a predominantly black circle of young radical intellectuals who met informally to discuss questions of black identity, African decolonization, and historical and contemporary racism. The members included Mary Agnes Lewis, Frederick Douglass Lewis, Donald Hopkins, Leslie and Jim Lacey, Nebbie Lou Crawford, Ernest Allen Jr., Margot Dashiell, Welton Smith, Shamala Goplin, Kamala's mom, and Donald Warden, most of whom were named in the preface of Black Marxism as the circle of friends with whom the project had its beginnings. Out of these meetings, Donald Warden, a law student, formed the Afro-American Association, whose future members included Black Panthers Bobby Seale and Huey P. Newton. I can't stress enough the importance of these gatherings, for it was here, not in the classroom, that Cedric Robinson and his cohorts were not only exposed to Black studies, but co-creating it, laying the foundation for the political and intellectual eruptions on college campuses 6-7 years later. Meanwhile, Cedric spent most of his suspension period traveling through Mexico, his second choice after Cuba. His decision to visit Mexico may have been inspired by Laura Nader, a young anthropology professor who studied indigenous people in Oaxaca, Oaxaca, I think I said that wrong, whom he would cite as a major influence. He wandered the country, living amongst the people, took photos, improved his Spanish, studied Mexico's cultures and politics, and read. In 1961, he turned to campus for summer sessions where he took classes in anthropology and sociology and delivered a damning paper titled Campus Civil Rights Groups and the Administration, at a conference organized by the left-leaning campus group SLATE, S-L-A-T-E. He criticized the administration's unremitting hostility towards civil rights organizations, recounting its ban on Malcolm X, and closed with a scathing critique of Berkeley's students' government for its failure to take on the administration. Officially reinstated in the fall of 1961, Cedric resumed his excuse me, friends. Hold up, let me close this window. Ba-dum, ba-dum. Ba-dum, ba-dum. Ba-dum, ba-dum. Bum, bum, dun, dun. Oops. Officially reinstated in the fall of 1961, Cedric resumed his coursework and political activities and spent much of the academic year raising money for what would prove to be the formative experience leading to his own discovery of the Black radical tradition. A summer in what was the Central African Federation, working with Operation Crossroads Africa. Ooh. Let's look that up later. Founded by Reverend James H. Robinson, a prominent activist and pastor of the Presbyterian Church of the Master in Harlem, Operation Crossroads was the prototype for the Peace Corps. Ooh. Its stated objective was to recruit students to help build libraries, schools, and community centers in Africa. But Robinson and his liberal Cold War funders saw Operation Crossroads as a political and spiritual bulwark against the spread of communism in the Third World. At the same time, his support for anti-colonial movements made him a target of the right. Cedric was part of the 11-person delegation based in Bulawayo, B-U-L-A-W-A-Y-O, Bulawayo, Zimbabwe, where it was tasked with the building of a primary school in Tshabalala. Tshabalala Township. Tshabalala. I wonder how that's pronounced. I should have looked that up. The native but skeptical group arrived at a critical moment in Zimbabwe's history. The federation, which included Zambia, the Malawi, had just experienced unprecedented economic growth, but Zimbabwe undergoing rapid industrialization and the United States ramping up production in Zambia's mines. Consequently, European immigration to Zimbabwe increased, strengthening white settler rule. Just as African nationalism was resurgent everywhere else on the continent. By the summer of 1962, the 10-year experiment in federation was on the verge of collapse as support for African independence grew. When authorities banned the Southern Rhodesian African National Congress in 1959, it responded by reforming the National Democratic Party (NDP) in January 1960. The state then passed the Law and Order Maintenance Act, which sanctioned mass detention and crackdowns of demonstrations, resulting in at least 11 deaths in Bulawayo and Salisbury. I hope I said that right. Ultimately, the NDP was banned on December 9th, 1961. 10 days later, the Zimbabwe African People's Union, ZPU, was formed. The white liberal minority continued to support federation based on the belief that Africans in the northern colonies would electorally overwhelm Zimbabwe's white settler population and bring about a harmonious interracial system of governance as a hedge against African nationalism. But liberal dreams were easily crushed when the right-wing Settler Rhodesian Front won the majority of seats in December of 1962 elections, forcing ZAPU entirely underground. You gotta look that up. This is the world Cedric experienced in the summer of 1962. Imagine, first landing in Nairobi. Girl, I told you I gotta reread it myself. Shoot. This is like my third time reading it, just the beginning. Listening to the forceful speeches ending in... I wonder how this is spelled. Okay, we're gonna look this one up. It means freedom. Let's look it up. I just read out Phenomenal Woman by Maya Angelou. Hurue. Swahili. I want to hear it. Swahili. Open in Safari, please. It means freedom and independence.
Uhuru.
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 Uhuru. Uhuru. Uhuru.
Uhuru. Uhuru. Uhuru.
Do you hear it?
Uhuru.
Freedom! To freedom! And then arriving in a country named for arch-imperialist Cecil Rhodes and being forced to hear white businessmen rail against the dangerous and irresponsible ZAPU. The American officials speak on the value of U.S. investment in South Africa. Cedric's diary entries were filled with often righteously funny descriptions of officials. He wrote about being introduced by a vaudevillain team of Finkel and Terex. What's that? Finkel? What is... The director of African education for Southern Rhodesia and the Salisbury Bookseller Counselor, respectively. And then they witnessed the federal assemblies. He remarked on the pomp on the pomp of British Rhodesian unicameral parliament, which included the African equivalent of Uncle Tom's. At the same time, he got to see major Zimbabwe nationalist leaders speak, including ZIPU's founding member Joshua Nkomo and Reverend, oh no, I don't know how to say his name. Let's put it in my phone because I really don't want to mess this up. NDABAN. Oh, I just saw his name somewhere. Wait, how do you? He died in Philadelphia? That's crazy. But how do you say his name? Pronunciation. How to pronounce?
Ndabadingi Sithole.
Non-Badingi Sithole.
Ndabadingi Sithole.
Not.
Ndabadingi Sithole.
Non.
Ndabadingi Sithole. Ndabadingi Sithole.
Dongbadingi Sithole. Per, whose speeches he surreptitiously recorded at a rally in July. He also noted in his diary having heard a fantastically valuable lecture on the history of Southern Rhodesia by Dr. Terence Ranger, one of the most controversial figures in Southern Rhodesia. Cedric was more interested in ordinary people. He had a reputation for wandering off the compound and the campsites wherever he heard local music and dancing. When he wasn't laying brick or joking around with his peers, he could be found at the Tabiso Youth Center speaking with unemployed African men whom he found to be alert and sometimes insensitive. The group did not get into a row with the so-called leading citizens for allegedly disrespecting them, specifically for refusing to listen to the European point of view and siding with the African nationalists. When they visited the Dunlop tire factory, for example, crossroaders reportedly tried to engage employees in political arguments and compared the differences in wages between African and European employees. And yet, when one of the black women in their group was refused service at a restaurant, the leading citizens of Bulawayo had nothing to say. Soon after his return, Cedric published his observations on the political situation in Zimbabwe in the Sun Reporter, San Francisco's black-owned newspaper. I want to see if there's archives of that. La di la di la, li di 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 di, la di da di da da di da. Unlike the witty diary entries where he reflects on the sobering realities and inspiring possibilities of Southern Africa in 1962, hold up, wait a minute. Next, done. Search. Girl, sometimes she wants to work with me, sometimes she don't, but that's okay. You're just gonna try again. I ate. Okay. Girl.
Excoriate.
Oh, excoriates meaning criticize severely. He criticizes severely the white settler state for outlawing ZIPU and provides a powerful thumbnail sketch of the history of colonialism, in Zimbabwe and the rise of the African nationalist movement. Maybe we should read that. Ugh. La di da di da 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 da. Ooh, ooh. Sorry. He found in the culture in the anthem. We should start putting pronunciations next to these words. Huh. S I K I Afriki. Oh wait. Oh. Okay. How do we pronounce that? It's the national anthem of South Africa was adopted in 1997. How do you pronounce it? But okay, I'm gonna see if I can add it in. Pause.